I'm a simulation design and gaming major, but with a focus on animation for movies or TV shows, or specifically a visual medium, not necessarily gaming or like a technical simulation. So when I took Video 1, I wanted my documentary to be something that applied all of the stuff that I had learned. The original concept was a fictional documentary about the first intelligent robot. The plan was to shoot as much of it practically as possible. All of the scenery and the settings were supposed to be real, and any other characters I wanted to be real as well. The robot was supposed to be the only thing that was completely CG. And even then, I didn't want to hand animate that. I wanted to use performance capture so that it felt real. Maybe even in the same environment, ideally in the same environments that we were filming in, but just after the fact. I knew that I could record video and then motion track that into a 3D scene. I knew that I could get motion capture data off of my depth camera and convert that into animation. I knew that I had a robot model, and I had done some tests ahead of time where I combined all of that together into a real, a short, less than a minute long clip, like a proof of concept, and it worked pretty well. It wasn't amazing, but that was mostly because it was shot on a phone rather than a camera. The video quality wasn't good, but that wasn't the point. The point was to prove that I could take realistic, believable looking animation and then track it into video of the real world and have it be maybe not believable, but like acceptable. The one thing that I didn't think about when I was doing my tests was audio. Up until I actually started filming for the fictional documentary, I had been working with video and animation on that video. The audio didn't matter, because I didn't have a script written, I didn't have any good microphones to record from. I figured that as long as I tracked to the video, it wouldn't matter what the audio was, because the audio would be synced up with the video that it came from. What I didn't realize was that the audio that I was going to be using was going to come from the actual motion capture shot itself. Because when people talk, they kind of move around and they gesture based on what they're saying, and the audio has to be specifically synced up with the animation. I hadn't considered that ahead of time. In my mind, it was a robot who, the model doesn't even have a mouth, it just kind of has a speaker. So I figured it wouldn't even be a big deal if the audio wasn't quite synced up, but once I was doing actual tests with the audio, I realized that it definitely mattered a lot. If you don't sync the actor's movements up with the emphasis and the inflection of the audio, it almost doesn't make any sense at all. It doesn't matter that he doesn't have a mouth that you can, track lip flaps to. There's so much more subtlety to the way people communicate. The problem I was having in this scenario was that the motion tracking camera and the audio setup were two different things. Theoretically, they should have been about the same. The camera that had the audio was recording at 30 frames per second, and the audio is linked to that. And the motion tracking camera that I was running off of my laptop was also supposedly running at 30 frames. It should have been fine, it should have just worked. But I don't know if it was something that I did incorrectly when I actually brought the animation in to my animation program, or if it was some audio video quirk that I'm not really aware of. But the animation was too fast. Animating the hands and the fingers ended up being another challenge that I didn't even get to. That would have been the next thing to solve once I figured out the audio timing issue. The robot's hands cannot open and close its fingers. They don't have the same degrees of freedom as we do. They only have the open and close. The thumb was pretty good, but the fingers don't. This was originally something I had planned for. The robot was supposed to have to struggle with not being suitable for certain tasks, like, for example, typing. But the motion tracking that I was doing wasn't detailed enough to track individual hand movements. So all of his hand animation would have to be done by hand after the fact, which would have increased the amount of time it takes to finish the project by quite a bit. rendering the project, even in my early testing, was giving me problems that I hadn't considered ahead of time. One of the things that was going to be necessary to make a convincing animation was to make sure that it was the same frame rate as the target video, but that it was also the same type of shutter speed, because if the robot moves, really fast, and it has really crisp animation, and the video footage has kind of that blurry shutter speed smear to it, you're going to be able to, it would be obvious that the robot was not real. So that was one of the things that I was going to have to simulate. It would have been fine if I had rendered on all of my own local machines. The problem is that the type of video that I was going to be doing, that's going to be, multiple minutes long, I just don't have that kind of time. It would take like multiple days, maybe even a week for certain scenes. I just don't have that kind of time. So I was going to use an online rendering farm where lots of computers kind of distributed out, among different owners, all collectively come together to render people's, computer-generated animation. The problem that I hadn't considered is that the way that the render farm handles animation and motion blur is not the same as the way it does on a local machine when you go from frame 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and you render each of them individually. I was getting a problem where a machine would be told, render frame number 400 or whatever, and then it would jump from frame 1 to 400, and I would get a big motion smear across that whole range of movement from frame 1 to frame 400, and it would look really weird. It was giving him these really long, kind of ghosty fingertip claw problems. If I had started working earlier, I probably could have caught that problem sooner and then either figured out a solution or figured out what was causing the problem to begin with. But as it is, I didn't catch it soon enough to realistically fix it before I needed my final cut, my first draft and final cut to be ready for the documentary. I chose a project that I knew was going to be difficult and challenging. I did that on purpose. I like trying new things that I don't necessarily know how to do completely. Sometimes deciding to just figure it out as you go and learn on the fly isn't always the best choice. If it turns out that you don't know how to do something and you have a deadline and you've committed yourself to a certain type of project, you're kind of screwed. Which is why it's important to always build in a plan B and a plan C and anticipate what types of things you might not be able to figure out or what kinds of problems you might run into, and build solutions to them in advance. I don't regret trying the challenging project even though it didn't really work out. I'm disappointed that I didn't make it work, but I don't think it was a bad idea to do it in the first place. I still learned a lot from it.